From our /AskReddit, serious, hikers of Reddit, what was the scariest/weirdest thing you have seen in the wilderness?
A buddy of mine and I had a gold claim deep in the mountains in California. One day we were hiking up the river with our dogs to check out the river and see if anything changed over winter as it sometimes does. He was an older man and saw a log and sat down for a smoke. I sat next to him and we were facing the river with a steep mountainside behind us with a ridge about 15+ feet up. Suddenly his smaller dog started whining and ran up and hid under his legs, and my German Shepherd stood up and did a low growl while looking up the hill. I joked, "That's not a good sign." I turned around and a very large mountain lion was crouched ready to pounce. We stood up and I started yelling as I grabbed my pistol. The lion realized we weren't small easy prey and took off running. We knew there were bears and empty lions around but never saw one before. If the dogs hadn't noticed and reacted, it likely would have pounced us and tore us up before we could fight it off. We were both armed, so one of us would have gotten off a shot. I never went anywhere there ever again without at least one gun. We were 15 miles from the nearest paved road and another 30 miles to any civilization, so being injured up there would suck.
Mountain lions are crazy with not only how quiet they are, but how they blend into their environments due to coloration. I saw one in the mountains of NV in a rocky ravine, and it was like the rocks were moving at first. My eyes were confused by what they were seeing until the brain caught up.
Yeah, I had a second semi-encounter years later when I was up riding horses in the mountains above San Jose. It was dusk and my friend and I were riding back to the cabin, and the horses stopped and were fighting us when we tried to get them to keep going. Right then, about 40 feet ahead, I saw a big empty lion cross the dirt road. The grass on both sides was maybe a foot tall, and it just like appeared on the road and then disappeared on the other side like it was walking behind a curtain. We spun the horse around and took off the other direction and came the back way to the cabin.
Coming down a mountain trail at dusk, I realize I may have lingered at the summit a bit too long. By my estimation, I have perhaps a bit less than an hour to the trailhead. I'm alone, but know the trail well, and have a headlamp on me. Just as dusk fades into a moonless, pitch-black night, I'm rounding a corner and freeze instinctively. Eye shine is reflecting back at me from the darkness, about 30 yards away. The vague outline of a large solitary black bear emerges from the forest and steps onto the trail, facing me. It stares at me and I stare back. Black bears live in this area, I've known this, and seen them twice before during the day on previous trips. Nothing like being face to face with one at night though. I raise my hands above my head, making myself as big as possible. I scream long and loud. As guttural and fierce a man's scream I can muster. The bear pauses and chuffs at me, briefly looking behind it at the forest it came from. It then slowly and casually turns away from me, walking back into the forest from where it came. The crunching sound of leaves underfoot of the bear grows quieter until the only thing I can hear is my pounding heartbeat. I realize I now have to go in the same direction as the bear went. Maybe a minute or so goes by, and I sprint. As I pass the point where the bear stood, I glance at the woods while not stopping and see nothing. Shortly after, while running, I look back behind me, back up the trail to make sure I am not followed. I continue to periodically glance behind me while running down the mountain. I endure maybe 30 long minutes of running in pitch darkness down this mountain with my heart at 130 BPM. Thankfully I didn't trip or fall and injure myself. Made it back to the trailhead safely.
Where I live, they are very common. A big boy was out and about last night when I took dog out before bed. He scampered off. It is alarming to know a 300+ bear is out there in the dark and you never know when.
At a backcountry lake in Yellowstone. Had a bear, presumably Grizz, at our camp all night. 3 of us shaking in our tent, hoping bear spray worked. The bear didn't do anything. Next morning while cooking breakfast, I noticed something swimming to our camp from a mile away. A moose crossed a massive lake and ended up in our camp. He was an asshole. Scared us more than the bear. Very aggressive. No big culmination. But we left the camp, then the moose pooped on our tent.
One time I went camping with a bunch of friends and someone got drunk and puked outside their tent. An elk came traipsing through the campsite in the early morning and pissed on the puke pile.
All I'm getting from this thread is that while bears are dangerous, moose are more dangerous and also huge jerks.
I found human remains alongside pottery shards, but it's typical with the Native American history on that particular mountain. I found a tennis ball in a coyote den. Dogs will be dogs, I guess.
Those both sound kinda awesome, not scary.
In regards to the tennis ball in the coyote den, we've had frequent coyotes visiting our yard since last November due to land being cleared up the road from us. I had to start putting the kids' toys, especially balls and ball-like toys, up by the house. The coyotes will take them to the lower part of our yard and shred them while they play with them.
I do a lot of week-long trips throughout Arizona. Just pick a remote location and walk for 20 to 30 miles and explore everything I can. I was south-south/west of the Mazatzals when I unpacked my gear and was setting up camp on top of this ledge overlooking this pretty wide valley. I started a little fire that started smoking and decided to take a quick piss of this ledge. As I'm midstreaming looking out over this valley, I look over to my right and I see a fucking Mad Max looking Hills Have Eyes motherfucker taking a piss off the same ledge, looking the same direction over the valley, about 75 feet away. He looks over, acts surprised, "Oh hey, I didn't see you there," and decided to walk over to introduce himself as homeless. I fucking fed the guy rice and beans. He talked about God and some sort of giant bones he was looking for from the original humanoid giants or something like that. There was something wrong with him, but I was scared to dismiss him from my sight or hurt his feelings. Didn't get any sleep that night and have never slept with my handgun inside my sleeping bag since.
You probably don't care, but that sounds exactly like one of the necrophiliac characters from Red Dead Redemption, grinning squinting face. I'd be scared too.
Yeah, still not sure what his intentions were. I have some other stories too in the backwoods of AZ. Pretty sure some guy tried to pull the classic roadside robbery.
Would you mind sharing some of them, please? Sounds interesting.
Was driving in a rainstorm up Cherry Creek Road, AZ, when I saw a guy stick his hand out from a tarp in a desperate attempt to wave me down. It was raining hard and I've always made it a point to help anyone in need. I pull over and roll down my window and ask the guy what's up. He claimed he had ridden his bike, small trailer attached, from Phoenix and that he and his dog were wet and cold and needed a tent. Now Phoenix is easily over 100 miles away from where we were, so I was a little suspicious. He claimed he had lots of money and he wanted me to drive to Walmart to buy him a tent and bring it back to him. Walmart from this point was about a 2-hour drive, so I told him instead he could throw his stuff in the bed of my truck and I'd drop him off up the road under some trees. He refused and said he needed a tent and that he was worried for his and his dog's safety. He also threw in a comment about being a Vietnam vet and that he doesn't deserve any of this. So I regrettably agree. I ask him for the money to go get a tent and he denies and says he'll pay me when I get back. I'm not about to drive out of my way for some dude who fucked himself on the side of a dirt road unless I get this money. That way I know he'll be there when I get back. So I get out of my truck and decide to go face to face this man under his tarp. I'm only this cocky because I go everywhere in the backwoods with my handgun strapped. It's dark and I get up close and let my flashlight reflect off the ground to light up his face and tarp. This is where I got the creeps. The dude instantly had a different tone of voice and body language when he saw the gun on my hip. The money he was flaunting in the dark was about 10 $1 bills wrapped together, although he said it was about $130. Said he was a veteran, but he looked to be about 30 years old with tattoos running up his neck. The inside of his tarp was completely dry, he had a stack of dry blankets, and there was no dog. He couldn't look me in the eye and said he no longer needed help and that he'll wait for someone else. This pissed me off because I didn't want someone else to run into whatever he was trying to do. I told him if I saw him on my way back, I was going to call the sheriff's office. He didn't respond and kept looking at the ground. Never saw him again and don't know what to make of it. I had this horrible feeling though that he was sitting on top of a gun of his own. Made sure I walked backwards to my truck.
I was on a trail in the Alps where you could most of the time only see a couple of meters in front of you because the side of the mountain hid the rest of the trail. Basically to the left of you, you had the mountain at a 90-degree angle, then in front your little trail where two people could barely pass each other, and on your right side you had a ledge with a roughly 10-meter drop. So I was already hiking for a couple of hours and was pretty much in this mental zone you get into after being physically active for a long time where all you can concentrate on was the walking and not tripping on some rocks. But I had to be immediately wide awake when I had all of a sudden this giant ibex stood in front of me. The thing was just strolling around the mountain and probably didn't hear or see me coming either because you could tell it was just as shocked to see me as I was to see him. So I stood there looking this thing in the eyes, which is nearly as big as me while probably weighing a fuck ton more, on this really narrow mountain trail with no way of evading anything coming towards me. We stood there looking each other in the eyes for a couple of seconds and I remember feeling how my survival instinct kicked in and I was weighing options in fractions of seconds on how to handle this situation if this thing decided I was a threat and started charging at me. I think I settled with the options to try and make myself look as big and heavy as possible when all of a sudden this thing just turned itself to the ledge side of the trail and just jumped down the 10-meter drop like it was nothing. I tell you these animals are fucking insane and you won't believe what they are capable of until you see one doing these crazy jumps with your own eyes. This was truly one of the scariest and weirdest things happening to me while hiking.
My siblings and I were wandering around the forest behind our neighborhood and we came across an old refrigerator in the middle of nowhere. It had metal chains wrapped around it and a big padlock keeping it shut. We were pretty spooked by it so we went home and told our dad about it. He came back with us to take a look for himself and he agreed how creepy it was. The next day he notifies the police and he takes them to it. But when they return, Dad says that the fridge was gone. They could clearly make out tracks dragging it back to the road using a hand truck and the cops suspected that it could have been something to do with the gangs and drug trafficking in the area. We were honestly really glad that we never got to see inside of that fridge, but what really creeped us out was that there was a high chance that whoever moved the fridge saw us nosing about it, and then got rid of it when we left. We quickly decided it would be for the best if we stopped exploring our local gang and drug-infested forest.
Hiking with my father, uncle, and a retired former Alaskan hunting guide in the outback for a 2-day trip before end of holiday. It had to be 10 or 11 at night, but the sky was clear so the light was that really uncanny bright moonlight. Sitting around the fire after eating, all quiet like, some motion in the far distance sort of caught my eye and I instinctively said, "A deer?" Before my brain went, we don't have those. But Reddit, I could in that moment swear to fucking God it was a deer. I'd been living in Massachusetts for uni. I saw them all the time, I was absolutely sure. Uncle grabbed my leg and stopped me from getting up, said, "You didn't see it, you didn't hear it, you don't invite it." And we all just sat there staring very focused into the fire for a half hour. You could deadass hear whatever it was shuffling around us in various locations, and then it made a weird like croaky gross laugh sound and whipped off at an absolutely insane speed. We hike every time I'm home for holiday, but I tell you what, we don't hike around there. Edit so I don't make too many fellow Oz eyes twitch. I know we have deer. But this wasn't a somber or a fallow, and it was like jet black, so it wasn't a red. I called it a deer. Because it was deer-shaped but all kinds of off-tilt in features. It also looked like someone had cut its legs off at the knees and it was walking on the stumps, it was so short. I've seen hundreds of deer in the outback. I've never seen this thing and I know we don't have anything like it.
This is super similar to my skinwalker experience. Almost identical actually, and reading your comment gave me an intense flashback. I was about 13/14. My dad, my uncle, my little cousin and I were on a dirt bike/quad trip up the trail surrounding Goat River, beside Creston, BC. We had finished most of our riding for the day and we found a quaint little camping spot next to the river. It was probably 5/6 p.m., not dark but not super bright out either. We had a campfire going with some fish we'd managed to catch cooking over it. My cousin, who was probably around 10 years old, wandered over to the river, we heard him calling for us to come over because he saw a dog. The adults and I hastily sprint over because we knew it probably wasn't a dog and was most likely a coyote eyeing up the child for a quick snack. What we found wasn't exactly a coyote, but could only be described as eerily close. It was longer, slender, had big eyes, and to top it off was standing upright on its hind legs. It didn't look like a dog standing on its hind legs though, it looked humanoid in stature. It was just staring at us, never once looking away. Looking at it longer, its face didn't seem to be canine in any capacity, it had humanesque features with a fur-covered body. My dad and uncle both seemed frightened. My uncle grabbed my cousin and put him on top of their quad while my dad told me to get my backpack and my tent bag and that we weren't staying in the woods that night. As my uncle walked back towards the campsite, the thing across the river started walking towards us. It took long strides into the deep, quick-moving water, without any sign of struggling from the currents. As soon as it got to about waist deep, my dad turned to me and yelled, "We've got to go, and we've got to go now." We dashed back to our camp. My uncle and cousin were both on their quads. My dad yelled, "Leave your shit, just turn the bike on and get out." My uncle and I revved up our engines and peeled out of there as fast as we could, my dad following shortly behind us. My dad's a very stoic and composed individual. We raced back to our trucks, which must have taken 2 to 3 hours in the pitch black. Once we got back, my dad claimed that he saw it sprinting behind us as we drove away. That it must have been going over 30-50th kilometer an hour and that it was running on 2 legs. My dad's Native American, we're actually Iroquois Indian, and he swore that we saw was a skinwalker, or something else. Either way, I've never been that terrified in my life, and I've never seen my father more shaken than that night.
That is a bone-chilling story, thank you for sharing. Are there books by Native American authors about these things? I'm not American, but it seems Native American legends are uniquely terrifying. I can't get enough of them.
It's very taboo to even mention the name, at least for the Navajo. It might be hard to find books by Native American authors.
It is because when one speaks of evil, it gives it power. Like Arp's uncle advised, you didn't see it. You didn't hear it. You don't invite it. Speaking of it invites it.
Thank you for watching this video about the woods to the end. If you found it entertaining, try liking the video, and leaving cryptic unhelpful advice in the comment section. Till next time, have a good life.